If you want to create those leads in your electronic music that come in and fill out the entire track, somehow adding even more to the wall of sound, it's actually a lot more simpler than some people will lead you to believe. You don't need serum, you need, well, just 4 simple things. We'd start with a basic wave. The saw or the square wave are both great options because they're really harmonically rich. We need some kind of modulation effect like a chorus or a flanger. We need something to create space, so a reverb or a delay, and then we need a little bit of secret sauce in some distortion. Don't believe me? All right, we're going to go from one part of the track to where the lead comes in. All right, so let's just have a little look at that. What about the lead in isolation? It's this. Not a particularly big sound, but it's really prominent in the area that it is in. If we take the channel EQ on the track, there's nothing below 400 Hz. It's all cut away, so it's all high end. And if we have a look at what it's doing, it's just harmonic and the series of harmonics above it, with some distortion to give it some flavor. In the context of a whole track here, there we go, we can see it, and then for the most part it blends in, but those harmonics are allowed to poke through in the track, and that's why it picks up so well on the ear. And we can see them. The other reason that works is that the lead is following along with the chord and main melody of the track. If we take the bass, chord and lead notes all together here, we can press E in Logic, it will give us the piano roll, and here we can see all the notes in those sections that we've highlighted. Our bass notes are there, our chord structure is there, and our lead is there. Now we can see that the bass notes are following the lower tone of the chord structure, and we can see that the lead is following the top line of the chord structure. So when we take the two, they kind of just blend in together. Now if we went and had the top lead having a completely different melody, there'd be times that it's fighting with rather than reinforcing all the other sounds and all the other harmonics. And that's one of the reasons that when we put it in there, it can poke through so easily, because it's just reinforcing all of the other harmonics and is completely in key with everything else. It's very simply a detuned saw. So we've got saw here, ever so slightly detuned by 5 cents here, which gives that kind of a phasing effect. If we take that away, that's what helps it gives that wobble and pulse. We've then got the vibrato here turned up a little bit, and that's giving a little bit of wobble on the vibrato, which is helping it pitch up and down ever so slightly out of that perfect tuning. Okay, but very, very small amounts to the point it just helps the ear really pick it up. LFO here is not really being used. It's applied at 0.04 amount to the filter over here. We could have it go like that. But it's basically off. Gives the tiniest little wobble effect. And the chorus here is doing quite a bit of work in to spread the sound out. And that gives it that kind of effect where it wraps around everything else. Now, when we pause it there, we hear that tail off, and that is coming from the reverb here. And the reverb's to give it its own sense of space. It's very, very dry. Now this is the only sound that goes into this reverb. So when it creates that own space, this is the only sound that ever sits in that space. Relatively high mix at 35%, but it just puts this sound in its own little isolated space. Our ears pick that out, and there we are. In context of the whole track, if we take the reverb away, so the lead is still there, we can still hear it, but it hasn't got its own little space and isolation. We do this a lot with vocals. When we want them to be really focused, we give them a reverb. Our brain goes, well, they're in that space, and picks it out really well. Same works for the lead here. I've then distorted everything using Fat Effects, including the reverb itself, which is why the reverb isn't on a separate send, for example, it's directly on the channel. I wanted to just distort the whole thing. And we've pushed up the scream here, and that's what generates those extra harmonics that we could see in the channel EQ. When I disable the distortion here, we're going to lose a lot of level. So what you're going to see is I put the output up to kind of match the level so we can hear it with and without the distortion, but I've had to gain it down quite a lot because the distortion gave it loads of extra level. So that was an example where it's just the instrumentation. There's a template for Logic. What about in context of a track where there's a vocal and lots more elements going on? Can we still get the same thing to happen? We'll have a look at my track Feeling Heavy, which was released with the channel sponsor, which is DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. I thought this would be a good example to show this in a overall track. So this is the track Feeling Heavy, which has a lead line that follows along with a vocal melody. So here are the key instrumental elements in the track that are written out. And as we can see before, we've got our chord structure. Got a subline up here. I don't know why I've organized this one weird. And look, we can see that they are in fact, like I said before, following and reinforcing one another. And the lead design itself should be pretty similar. This time I've just used ES2, so again, stock Logic, happy days there, right? Channel EQ wise, nothing below the 60 Hz range, although I probably have some automation on here because I've got this big bump up in the low end. We're using delay as the second plugin instead of the reverb, but doing the same thing, giving it that dedicated space. Super dry without that, isn't it? This time I'm using the flanger plugin, and this is going after the delay. On the Kino type track in Retro Synth, we had the chorus built directly in. I've used the flanger afterwards in this case. Really, really similar principle. And then we've got Neutron afterwards, Neutron 3, and look, and it's an exciter. I used Fat Effects in the other one. Again, I'm doing that exciting, adding the extra harmonics to make the lead pop out. So let's take everything off and then introduce it. So there's the dry sound from the ES2, EQ, delay, flanger, and the distortion. I think it's fair to say those two examples illustrate pretty well my point of the key things you need to make these leads pop out in your track. So as you can see, two different examples, but the principles remain exactly the same. Harmonically rich saw or square wave, something to create modulation effect, so flanger, chorus, even a phaser would work, something to give it space, so a delay or a reverb, and then some distortion to thicken it up and add extra and additional harmonics in there, but controlled in a way that works with the track.